Hello and welcome to the Scientology Humanity Project on YouTube, part of the larger SPTV community. It's a cold and rainy Sunday here. The lighting in my studio is a little bit off, so if it's a little bit dark, it's just one of those things. And hello, Denise. Welcome. Hello, Joe. Good to see you here. And Mary Rivers. Hello. Hi. Glad to have you here. And it sounds like a great topic. Yeah, you know what I'm going to talk about Sea Org today. I was talking to learning about life. Howdy, buckaroos from Austin, Texas. Howdy, learning about life. I like your icon there. South Park. Hello, Marla. Glad to have you here. And is that what is your dog? Is that an Akita? What is it? Beautiful dog. Hello, Warrior Queen. Good to have you here. I was interviewing a journalist from Germany called me, wanted an interview. And so we talked for a while. And the subject of the Sea Org came up, and it's basically the question is, how can Scientology get away with it? So I wanted to do a especially for viewers who live outside of America, and really a lot of secular Americans. I wanted to review some American history or Western civilization that I think is important to answering the question of how Scientology can get away with some of the things it does, because there is a bigger context. It's a husky. Okay, thanks. Good looking dog. So there's a bigger context historically that goes back a long way. And it's important, I think, to understand the foundations of the Constitution. Hello, Eli's mom. Good evening. Thank you. And so this is a review, and I don't know how much they teach of it in school, because there's so much has gone on, and reconsidering, American history. So it's, what I was taught growing up. This is a classical 1960s and previous, when the founding of America began, and one of the reasons America started was because of religious persecution. So Europeans felt they were persecuted by the church, the Catholic Church, or they felt that they were persecuted by, maybe they had been in the Protestant, John Calvin's Geneva, or even Martin Luther was a tyrant. So we're going to talk about, yes, arbitration clauses are ubiquitous and is a bigger problem in Scientology. We're going to go bigger than arbitration clauses. And essentially, when Constantine in around 325, I believe, made Catholicism the state religion of Rome, that was a fusion of state and religion. And the Catholic Church, of course, for 1,000 years or more, was the dominant power in Western Europe. And then as it migrated out, there were wars over it. So this goes back a long way to religion wanting to rule the world. Irrelevant panda. Well, why are pandas irrelevant? And why do you have the marshmallow man? So religious violence, for example, the Crusades, when the Catholics wanted to conquer the Holy Lands. So Western civilization is drenched in the blood of violence. And we're going to talk about Martin Luther King. Hey, Wayne. And this I want to give people, especially those who are younger or who grew up outside of America, some understanding. For example, when the Spaniards came to Central America and into Mexico. What was in Mexico? They decimated the indigenous peoples, as did the Europeans in North America. And then they imposed Catholicism upon those peoples, and they destroyed their temples. So there's been a great deal of bloodshed and slaughter. And if you look at the history of religious art, it's full of violence and blood. And it's so that's the historical context. For example, one thing I wanted to show you that's interesting in the Protestant Reformation. That was when Martin Luther, a Catholic priest, decided he wanted to break with the authority of the Pope. He had doctrinal disagreements, and Protestants are those who protested against the Catholic Church and broke away. But this is a big deal. When you get the real number, you'll find that the story is pretty gruesome, because we talk about the Holocaust, and so the Holocaust of World War II gives us something to compare with. So let me find my screen. Okay, we're going to share this. We're just going to start out with the Reformation, and that was of course, the historical movement in which the Protestants spent 200 years, maybe, breaking free of the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church was damn well not going to let a group of people leave its authority. There was too much money involved, too much power, and this was the tyranny of religion, the incredible tyranny of religion that we see in Scientology is a horrific example. But I wanted to revisit some history because, make it make sense. Well, it may not make sense, but this is what the history is. And so this article by Kathy Gibbons, she's a senior lecturer in history, University of Portsmouth. I think this is a good article. And she mentions it's 500 years ago, the Reformation started. And she goes through 5 of the most violent moments of the Reformation. And you can see these pictures. These are literally the St. you can see that first picture, 1572, St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. And this was Catholics fighting Protestants. Now there's Anabaptists and there's things. I'm just, Lutherans. There's a lot of offshoots of Protestantism, Lutheranism. So I'm just generally talking about Protestants, encompassing all Protestant, because there were breakoffs. In every movement, there's breakoffs. So there were people who broke off from Martin Luther, and there were the Anabaptists, and that's the Protestant denominations. So the German Peasants' War. So again, this goes on about 200 years. The end. Here's an example I want to show you. The end of the kingdom of Munster, Germany, you'd say. But something that's pretty horrific. You can see these. I want to make this picture bigger. Something I want to draw your attention to. These are cages, and these were when the Anabaptists took control of Munster, and that was put down. They put the bodies of the rebels up in these cages, which are still there to this day. It's quite shocking. If you Google the Munster cages, there's literally the dead bodies. The cages are still there to commemorate the war that went on there. And we have some, let's look at Munster. It's called St. Lambert's Church. And I'm going to go share this tab instead. Now, these are the actual cages. So to commemorate the leaders of the Anabaptist sect, the church, I want to get this picture right here. So this is what they did. This is, so we talk about religious violence. So the bodies of Jan Bakelson and the two other leaders of the Anabaptist sect were hung outside the Church of St. Lambert on 22 January 1536. Look at that. The church still has them hanging there today. They let the bodies just basically rot in these cages for the public display to terrify anyone. Now, why this church still keeps this monument to gruesome deaths going, it shows the mindset of the church. And this is this is what went on. So they mutilated the bodies and they put them in these cages. So this was part of the Reformation, is this battle. And we go back to an interesting number I wanted to ask is how many people died in the Reformation? And the generally accepted number is 8 million. 8 million people. So when you talk about genocide, you literally had a genocide. And I'm going to show you that. You literally had a genocide. And you can Google how many people died in the Protestant Reformation. And again, this was a war that went on probably. This is the Wars of Reformation. That is when the Protestants broke off from the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church resisted violently, and the Protestants fought back. The Wars of Reformation, often referred to as the European Wars of Religion, started in the 16th century and ended in the early 18th century. The costliest war during the conflict was the 30 Years' War, which killed between 3 to 11.5 million people. About a quarter to a half of the population of Germany was killed during the Reformation. But just during the 30 Years' War, you lost, if we take the high number, if we take the generally accepted number of 8 million, that's about equal to the Holocaust. And you can see how violent and bloody it is. Some numbers give us high as 50 million. So what happened is when the Europeans migrated over to the colonies, America was British colonies, and they broke off in the war, in our revolution, in 1787, when the Constitution was ratified. Freedom of religion, because religion was a big part of daily life for virtually all people. I mean, there were deists. A lot of the founding fathers were deists and not Christians, but they enshrined freedom of religion. And freedom of religion began with you didn't pay taxes, because it was viewed that you were conferring a public benefit. It wasn't formalized. The idea of religious tax exemption wasn't formalized until early in the 20th century. And that was the view, is your value of what you were offering offset it, but it wasn't. But you know what the founding fathers wanted to do, when you had state churches like the Church of England or the Catholic Church or even other churches, you would have to pay a tax to the church. You would pay a tax to the church whether you liked it or not. And so the idea of the beginning of America is you could have freedom of religion. You could believe in anything you wanted, but you were also free to not believe. Now, when religion was a big prominent in American life, atheism was dangerous. So a lot of people who are deists or atheists remain quiet because of the social ostracism. So the United States Constitution is based on freedom of religion, but it's enshrined, and it says that the U.S. government cannot interfere in religious activities. And so I wanted to show you a paper from the U.S. Department of Justice, and because I want to kind of show people, former Sea Org members, people from outside of America, people who maybe didn't know about some of this stuff, what you're up against. Because when you say, why doesn't the IRS just take away Scientology's tax exemption? It's all doable. I personally would like to start a foundation, raise about $1 million or more, and sue the IRS and file some lawsuits, because there's a lot of ways to do it. And there's also sue the Church of Scientology. So you really have to have some horsepower. It's not as easy as getting on YouTube and saying, why is this allowed? Well, it's allowed because in America, religion is unbelievably powerful and is protected by the laws. Marla asks, when did religious tax exemption come? When income taxes began? No. At the beginning of America, religious tax exemption has always been there because it was viewed as the house of God, and you weren't supposed to tax the house of God. And churches just weren't taxed. It was informal and just understood that from the beginning of America, they weren't taxed. But they began to formalize it. So not coincident with income tax. It was just when America became a big, powerful economy in the late 19th century and the industrial age, then they began to formalize it. And then when they introduced income taxes, they were formalizing a lot of things. So I want to show you this Department of Justice. There's something called a Federal Register, and it's important to know about if you're going to really study the issue. And because, like I said, it's not enough to get on YouTube and say, why does this go on? It's like you have to actually, you need intellectuals, you need lawyers, you need influencers, you need a lot of educated people, and you need money to take some legal action. Because the IRS isn't just going to say, oh, well, yeah, okay, we'll revoke it. They can't legally. They have to have a cause. And I think Aaron Smith Levin makes an important point where he wants to talk to former regs. The easiest way, in my opinion, to get Scientology's tax exemption revoked is to get former members who were involved in criminality, financial criminality, and they could file as whistleblowers. They can make deals to get, testify about Scientology's crimes. The easiest way is to have, if you were involved in Scientology and you committed criminal acts, you go to the Department of Justice and you say, hey, I want a deal. When Operation Snow White went down, Michael Meisner, who had engaged in numerous felonies, called the FBI in the middle of the night in a bowling alley. He'd escaped from his apartment where he was being held captive by the Guardian's office, went to a bowling alley, called the FBI and said, I want to testify. And he wasn't charged with anything. So you can get whistleblower protection for the government. That's the quickest way, is to show the Scientology is engaged in criminality, human trafficking. Take documents with you. You can take documents. So get all the evidence you can, escape, and go to the FBI or Department of Justice. You just call them and say, hey, this is a criminal organization. I have evidence. Now, that's that's why the FBI raided the Church of Scientology. There was actual evidence of criminal acts. So that's the fastest way to do it. Actual evidence of criminal activity with documents. And Michael Meisner, who was Guardian's office involved in Snow White, didn't have documents, but he knew where to find them. He knew where to get them. So there's a lot whistleblowers and leakers can do. But I want to show you what we're up against structurally in the United States. So the United States was founded with the idea is you have the freedom to practice any religion you want, and that freedom is protected. The state has no right to intrude upon religious laws. So ecclesiastical laws, the United States government can't interfere. They're not allowed to. Let me see. All over the world, religion is tax exempt. The law sees it as a nonprofit helping. Well, the idea is that the idea is that religion, if it helps the homeless, feeds the poor, does good deeds, offsets the cost to the government, and therefore it should be tax exempt. But when you get a deadbeat group like Scientology taking money from the government, using taxpayer resources, the roads, the schools, anything it uses that taxpayers pay for, Scientology doesn't give a damn thing back. Scientology is sort of the aberration. In fact, it is the aberration. It is the sickness. Then the IRS FTC needs to take Grant Cardone to task. That's getting off topic with Grant Cardone's not. You know what? Mike Rinder turned over a lot of stuff to the FBI. What the FBI chose to do with that, I haven't seen all the documents Mike turned over, and I don't know what went on. I know he did talk to the FBI. I know Marty did. I know a lot of people did. I know I have. I know I've turned over stuff. And one of my questions is, why isn't the FBI doing stuff? I can tell you that in 2010, there was a journalist who I'm not going to name because he's a prominent journalist, but he fucked up the investigation. He just fucked it up. And if you talk about FBI investigations and tip off the other side, that's why I don't mention stuff I have knowledge of. And you give the other side, they have this guy screwed up an investigation. He knows who he is, and he's never apologized for that. And I don't think he's going to. I think it's something disgraceful. And people make mistakes. That one was very costly. So anyway, Mike Rinder has done a lot, a lot to try to take down the church. So is Leah Remini. So is Claire Headley. And I'll give you an example before we get into the federal government stuff about how big religion incorporated in America is. And this has to do with never ends and versus the lived experience of former SEERG members, some of the controversies that go on, some of the discussions in SPTV. With the case of Danny Masters in his SA case, you needed never ends with law degrees. That is, you needed Reinhold Mueller and Errol Anson. They were never ends. You needed them to prosecute the case. You needed people like Claire Headley to testify. I was there when Claire testified. And her testimony, I believe, was very persuasive in convincing the jury that Scientology acted to cover up things per policy. So I believe Claire Headley was very effective using her high-level knowledge, because at one time she was the third highest ranking official in the Church of Scientology, RTC, per records the church introduced. So, you need people who are never in with law degrees. If you had people who have law degrees, even better. So you're going to need journalists, documentarians to bring attention, filmmakers, influencers who were in, documentarians like Alex Gibney who were never in. So you need everybody to do this. So this whole idea that there's that anyone has more authority than anyone else. No, it's like sort of a social thing, and the never ends can do a lot to help. But Claire, when you have someone who is there testifying, that's very powerful. And that's why I'm saying if you leak, if you choose to escape from the Sea Org and take documents or just testify, even if you don't take documents, if you're able to say what you saw, when you saw, and how they're doing it, where the bank accounts are, where the offshore stuff is very powerful. Oh, hi, Psych Sauce. Glad to have you here. Hello, Monkey Paws. Several grifting TV evangelists have themselves in the big house. You're right, it can be done. Yeah, Jim Baker is one of them, you know. Well, we have to get them charged with human trafficking. So you have to get a charge of human trafficking. You're going to need some people inside of Scientology saying, yeah, here's how we did it. And so again, you need evidence. But I want to show you something in the Federal Register, and I'm going to introduce you to a law you may not know about, which is horrific law. And okay, so let's share this. Now, this is from the Federal Register. And this is sort of like the newspaper of the U.S. government. it's you can see in the upper right-hand corner. I want you to become familiar with this. If you want to get serious, you can see in the upper corner here, there's the bird. It says authentic, upper left-hand corner, authenticated U.S. government information, government publication office, that's GPO. So I've been studying this, and basically these are sort of explaining the law. And in 2017, this is from 2017, Department of Justice here on the left-hand column, federal law protections for religious liberty. So this is where you get down into the weeds of policy. And there was a law passed when Clinton was president, and it basically was designed to protect religious freedom. And we'll get into that law. But you can see we're talking about executive orders here. So there's executive orders about protecting religion. But in this middle column, number one, this is for people who didn't grow up in the United States, may not know this part of our history. And I want to emphasize this. This is some education. It's not, there's no drama in it. It's just the law. It's more important to know than the drama that goes on at times, even though at times we do want to know the stories and the personalities. Nothing wrong with that. But basically, it says, we begin here, religious liberty is enshrined in the text of our Constitution. So it encompasses the right of all Americans to exercise their religion freely without being coerced to join an established religion. So basically, Scientologists have a right to practice their religion. Now, when you go into conduct, that's what we're looking at. So Scientology, and I'm going to do, like I said, I'm going to do my tax exemption, and I'm talking to my lawyer, not Granberry, another lawyer, about what I should say and what I shouldn't say, because I do have some information. The government has it. I don't know why they haven't done anything with it. It's probably stopped on someone's desk in a file, because some of the people in government are retired on the job. I swear to God, some of them do not want to risk their career. So basically, I'm going to post this in the show notes, but it talks about the constitutional protections and how hard it is to interfere with the rights, to restrict a religion, things like that. Government may not interfere. You can see number 9 in the middle column. Government may not interfere with the autonomy of a religious organization. Now, the real law, the problem, number 10, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993. This is turned into, it's been gone through some changes, but basically, this 1993 Act, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, it's been used to erode civil rights, like in the Hobby Lobby case, where a private employer, a for-profit employer, doesn't have to pay for birth control because it'll violate a private employer's religious views and beliefs. So the Hobby Lobby case was pretty awful, in my opinion, because it basically said you can be a for-profit business and you don't have to give your employees anything if it violates your religious rights. So this document, if you're really serious about understanding, Scientology enjoys the protection of laws, and it shouldn't. I think it does a lot of illegal behavior, and that's why there's a quick way to take out the beast if we can get whistleblowers and leakers. And you are protected if you whistleblow. So, like number 12 in the center column, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act does not permit the federal government to second guess the reasonableness of religious belief. So the government can't really do much about religions. Its hands are tied. And that's from the very beginning. The U.S. Constitution was ratified in 1787. And religion just kept getting more bigger and more powerful in American life and politics. And because religion represents such a big voting bloc, it represents such a big voting bloc, the religious people in America can really have a big say in who is elected to the White House, who's elected to the Senate, to the Congress, and even local school boards. So people who are secular, who don't practice religion, I don't think they see the power of religion. I don't think they see the groups, the lobbying groups that are designed to protect religions. And they also don't see the big federal laws like the RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. They don't see the import of the Hobby Lobby case. Because of the conservative religious justices on the U.S. Supreme Court, Roe versus Wade was overturned. Roe was overturned. And abortion is now illegal. And it's being fought. It was pushed down to the state level, basically, and I'm simplifying it. But you can see how powerful religion is. And now they want to overturn the Johnson Amendment. When Lyndon Baines Johnson was a senator, he put an amendment on a tax bill in 48. It made it illegal for churches to engage in politics. So now the religious right in America is sharpening its knives to overturn the Johnson Amendment to allow church tax exempt dollars to be spent on endorsing political candidates. So this separation of church and state, religion in America wants to crush. It wants to destroy the separation of church and state, and it wants to be able to decide who should be elected to office, and it wants to have a lot more power. And then we would revert back to a situation like we had in the Catholic Church in, 1,000 years ago, where it wanted to say what the law is. And L. Ron Hubbard even wrote that. He said, someday somebody will say this is the law. When that happens, make sure it's Scientology, and the orgs will become political centers. So there's a lot of people doing things about it. I'm going to stop sharing that screen. I'm going to share another screen. And this is, you have to educate yourself if you really want to get involved in it. And not everyone wants to, because like this fact sheet was put out by House Committee member Bobby Scott. And it's an interesting, he gives some background here on the Do Not Harm Act that they're proposing. They're trying to curb the power of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which they see as a religious groups using to erode our civil rights. And already in overturning Roe, that's an erosion of civil rights. And in some states now there's going to be criminal prosecutions if an abortion is provided, except in the most dire of circumstances. And I'm watching that. So many of us are watching that roll out. I'm not taking sides in the abortion debate. That's up to the individual person. I'm not taking a side. I'm just saying that the fact that they can actually put a doctor or even a woman in jail for attempting to terminate a pregnancy. So it's things like this. This is the context, and this is why Scientology gets involved in these interfaith groups, because the interfaith groups have an interest in sticking together. And I've made this example before. If I'm a Protestant, if I'm a Christian minister, and you're a Mormon, you're LDS, I abhor your theology as the works of Satan because you don't believe in the Holy Trinity like I do. So I think you're a cult, and I think you're satanic, because I think Joseph Smith was a false prophet. You don't hold to the doctrine of the Trinity, and you have a false salvation, and you think that if you baptize for the dead, that you'll get your own celestial kingdom. And I view that as all demonic, a false gospel, heretical, and of the devil. However, because I want to keep my tax exemption, and I want to use child labor, I want to exploit children and teenagers, and I don't, and I want to spend money the way I see it, and I want to influence politics. So he's apart, and I think you're satanic, and you think I have a false gospel, and I'm a heretic, and I'm the fraud. We're going to stick together when it comes to, laws that protect us. So that's the dirty back channel of religion in America. They can be doctrinally light years apart, but when it comes to things that protect their money, their right to exploit people, their right to oppress women, their right to be racist in the name of God, their right to be violent in the name of God, they all stick together. That's why Scientology and the Mormons, that's a dirty story. They're thick as thieves. LDS, Latter-day Saints, and Scientologists have secret back channel meetings. And these interfaith groups, they're all they all hang together or they hang apart. So that's one of the dirty stories in America. Well, I'm not getting it. I'm just giving an example. The LDS and the Jehovah's Witnesses don't hold to the classical formulation of the Trinity, which was formulated by the Catholics. And so I'm not debating. I'm just saying that if our beliefs are 180 degrees apart, we might consider each other heretics or from the, demonic or false gospel. But when it comes to protecting our bank accounts and our tax exemption, we're going to stick together, even though our doctrine is light years apart. That's my only point. So they form these interfaith groups that have to do more with, like, we don't want our children sent to public schools, which are evil, but we want the money, that money. Let's say it's $15,000 a year to pay for a child's education in a unified school district. I'm just throwing out a number. I don't know what it really is, but let's say it's $15,000 a year. If I were a Christian minister and I want to run a Christian school, then I want that $15,000 a year from the government. Because if I can get that times 1,000 kids, that's a lot of money I have. And I have the right to have a private Christian school and indoctrinate children. And the idea of children having no consent, that can be turned around by saying, no, children don't have consent. And that's why their parents have the right to raise them in their own religious tradition. And that's a conundrum. It's not good for the child. You want to be brought up in the Sea Org, that's its own ghetto, that's its own hellscape. But the parent has the right to raise their child as they see fit. Because the child can't the child can't give consent, the child can't also decide what's right or wrong in terms of, what their parents are doing. The child might not like it, but there's a lot of really bitter custody battles where parents fight because one parent doesn't want the other raised, in the other parent's faith tradition. So while you talk about children in the Sea Org not having consent, the fact is their parents have the right to raise their children in any religious tradition they choose. And that's a profound problem, because who's going to step in and the government doesn't have a right to step in and say, no, you can't put your child in the Sea Org at age 10. No, you can't do it. However, if you can show there's a violation, that you're basically exposing a 12, 13, 14-year-old teenager to explicit sexual content from adults, that can become a crime. So this is why lawyers are needed, intellectuals are needed, people who understand the tax code, people who understand crime. I think it could be an illegal offense. I'm just giving an opinion, not as a non-lawyer, non-expert. But if you're exposing a 14-year-old to explicit adult sexual content talking about sex, then you probably have a reason to file a lawsuit that the Church of Scientology illegally engages in basically horrendous child abuse by making teenage auditors do this. And there should be an age limit. So this is why you have a lot of landmines, but you have to understand the issues. That's why I'm saying that reading things like the Federal Register, understanding the laws in which we exist, because you're not going to get anywhere just talking on YouTube, Going back to this, oh wait, I want to go to this. So there are really good think pieces that if you're serious about the fight, you have to educate yourself. And you have to actually learn how to file a lawsuit, or how to take action, or how to get the IRS to examine it. And this is what I've been trying to educate people on, however imperfectly. This is another paper that's very interesting. It's current, and it's called the History of Religious Liberty in Federal Policy. So these are the kinds of things I'm interested in reading. And I think my 20-year exploration of Scientology as a modern religious and as a modern religious cult, I've learned a lot studying it in real time, along with things, other religious groups. And I'm winding that down. I'm going to be doing some other stuff. I'm going to be winding down toward the end of the year and pivoting to some other stuff that interests me. But watching this, I see the importance of how religion in America forms. They finance groups to protect their rights, and things like American Atheists counter that, and they file lawsuits. So this is very much a long-term game, unless you find very blatant criminality, credit card fraud, finance, and money in kids, as the FBI told me, or even human trafficking. So those are your alternatives. And this is an interesting thing I'm going to be posting on my blog, because I think it'll show you the context in which Scientology exists. And it kind of shows you some remedies, and it shows you what's happened, why religion is so powerful in America. This particular paper I liked, and it goes back and forth. And that's why one of the things that is really at play is the presidency of the United States, because the president, he or she appoints justices to the Supreme Court, who in turn decide what laws to uphold or overturn, as happened in Roe v. Wade. So that's kind of the big context. That's the big context. And personally, if I were the emperor, I would take away, and I'm not, but if I were the emperor, I would remove religious tax exemption and religious protections immediately. I would just remove them. Tax exemption for sure. And the treatment of children, would be equal to what the secular protections for children are. For example, The Jehovah's Witnesses, I brought this up before, prohibiting their children from having blood transfusions and killing them, I would make that a felony. The 38 states have protections for parents, religious parents who deny their children medical treatment, whether they're Christian Scientists, Jehovah's Witnesses, or Pentecostals, or extremist Christians who believe that medicine is of the devil. There was a case in which a child died of meningitis because the Book of Enoch says that medicine's not of God, that medicine's of Satan, and the parents actually believe that. So the idea, that's something that, again, if I were emperor, and I'm not, I would make illegal that you children are entitled to medical care. But in America, if you're a Jehovah's Witness parent, you can deny your child a life-saving blood transfusion, and in 38 states, you're immune from criminal prosecution. So in America, you have these subjective monotheistic kingdoms because they are monotheistic primarily. But you have these staggering kingdoms of monotheistic religious belief, which are laws unto themselves, and they're protected. In the Jewish courts, the Judaism has its own system of courts. Women virtually have no rights, according to some things I've read. The men have rights. So, but you're subjecting it to it. At the highest level, it comes down to this: consent belongs to the believer. You have the right to join a religion, and once you do, you've consented to be governed by the rules of that religion. You also have the right to withdraw from that religion and to not be governed by that religion. That's why I've always said, when you resign Scientology, you must write a letter saying, I'm resigning from the Church of Scientology. I'm resigning my membership from the International Association of Scientologists, and I'm withdrawing my consent to be governed by the rules of the Church of Scientology. And so I wanted to just go on to the Sea Org contracts. And I want to make an example of just a little piece of one, of why the Sea Org contracts are bad. Okay, now this is the basic Sea Org contract. Wait a minute, I'm sorry. This is the basic Sea Org contract. And I'm not going to read it in this way, but here's a couple things I want to note to you about a scam. Whenever you see, and this is, I'm talking as a private investigator, a fraud investigator, a couple things I noticed, just look at this. Don't even read it, just look at it. First of all, whenever there's a fraud, a scam, a con, whenever there's bullshit, they're going to stack all the text single spaced. See how visually cramped that is? It's single spaced. There's some small print. Look at that. So there are actually 1, 2, 3, 4 things here. So whenever the purpose of small print is to make it visually hard to read. That's why groups like really bad cell phone contracts, you think you're getting 3 months, but it's actually a 12-month contract. So a bad contract will always be crowded together. There's no breathing room, and it's visually difficult to read this. Just looking at this, it's visually difficult to read. You actually have to make a very concerted effort to read it line by line, which is hard. And if the recruiter for the Sea Org's pushing you under time pressure to initial, don't worry, it's just, to protect the group. So one thing to look for in a scam is densely stacked text. Densely stacked text that you can't read. Because when I look at this, I can't read it. It's like I have to stop and go word by word, literally. And this is done deliberately. This is part of deception and fraud. So the visual presentation of information in a way that makes your brain, it's hard for the eye-brain system to process this density of text. The eye-brain system, this is not a usual way of reading. You would never see this type of text layout in a book. A book has a relaxed, spaced out style that's easy to read, that's enjoyable to read, it's easy on the eye. So the visual monstrosity that this thing is it's actually designed psychologically to defeat the eye-brain system, to defeat visual discrimination, to defeat understanding. This is an illegal contract, in my opinion, because it's unreadable. It's unreadable, especially if you're under time pressure or duress. Now, let's break it down. I had to actually break this down, and I do this with a lot of Scientology things. I have to break them down into their component parts. So you're looking at this, but let's break it down into its component parts. Even this sentence the first sentence is hard to read, but I understand and agree that by this declaration, I am declaring a religious commitment to spiritual awareness. Okay, now stop right there. I don't even know what that means. I am declaring a religious commitment to spiritual awareness. That is meaningless. Okay, we pick up the next clause. I am declaring a religious commitment to spiritual awareness, comma, to the Scientology religion and to create a better world in accordance with this declaration. That wording is very poorly done, but it's deliberately done poorly because it doesn't mean anything. Now, if you're really, you're declaring a religious commitment to a better world, and yet you're engaged in human trafficking teenage children from Mexico, Central America, Eastern Europe, or you're involved in credit card fraud, then you don't have a commitment to create a better world. You're actually creating a criminal world. They're asking you to initial this. And what does it mean? How can you be spiritually aware if you're involved in human trafficking, cheating people, defrauding them, wronging them, lying to them, hustling them, getting them to turn over their life savings to you? So the next part we break down, and again, I want to emphasize the history of religion in America because the government doesn't have a right to interfere with this in America. They do not have a right to interfere with this. Okay, I further understand that all church staff members, including myself, are members of a religious order. Well, as I made clear in my work in the past, the Sea Org does not exist. Scientology says that Sea Org is a religious order, but it has no actual form of existence. No address, no checking account, no members. And I've shown in my past work that the Sea Org has no members and it has no one to give or receive orders because it has no members. So this is a fiction or a phantasm, and I've made that very, very clear over the years. Okay, so I further understand that all church staff members, including myself, are members of a religious order. No, that's not true because David Miscavige's lawyer said that the Sea Org doesn't exist. It does not exist. So I want to go to that to just show you this is maybe another way you could sue. So we're looking at that you're a member of a religious order. Well, let's go take that off the plate for a minute. So I'm going to stop sharing that because I want to share another screen. This is what I've shared so many times before, but it bears what we're talking about. And this is why you have to unpack Scientology, understand why it's hiding behind the First Amendment, and look at if we have lawyers and we actually had a foundation with $1 million to fund it. This is a point of a legal attack, I think. This is my 2015 article, Sea Org Fact or Fiction. And when David Miscavige was being sued in Monique Rathman's case. David Miscavige has said this, and I'm just going to read it. And this is something that I think you could get into court, and the government would have a right to look into, because there's fraud involved. There's fraud. You're signing a contract saying you're a member of a religious order, and yet Mr. Miscavige's attorney said that here. Plaintiff asserts that Mr. Miscavige exercised control, means overall, of Scientology, because he leads the Sea organization, a religious order within Scientology. And we just saw that we just saw here, that you're a member of a religious order. And here we're seeing that the Sea Org is a religious order within Scientology. But then Miscavige's attorney goes on to say, but a corporate entity. It has no physical or legal existence. It is not incorporated or established pursuant to legal formalities. It has no constitution, charter, or bylaws, and no formal or informal ecclesiastical, corporate, other management structure. It has no directors, officers, managing agents, or other executives, no employees, staff members, or volunteers, no income, no disbursements, no bank accounts or other assets, no liabilities, no stationery, no office, home, address, or telephone number. It does not create or maintain any financial, personnel, or other records. It can neither give nor receive orders because it has no one to either give or receive them or to carry them out. It cannot sue or be sued. The evidence Mrs. Rathman has submitted fails to establish a prima facie basis for an alter ego finding, because none of it involves the defendant's purported contacts relating to this suit, nor does any of it speak to the organization's current practices. So basically, the Sea Org has no existence whatsoever, and yet you're going to say that you're joining a religious order, but it doesn't exist. And that I think, if you associate it saying, look, I joined a non-existent entity, so therefore binding arbitration isn't binding upon me. I was joining what I thought was an actual entity, but it isn't. So that might be a possible thing to do. But again, even look at the density of this. So there's fraud right there. Mr. Miscavige's attorney, David Miscavige's attorney, decimated the Sea Org, laid it to waste utterly in Rathman versus Miscavige. That's court record. And yet in the contract, they're saying it does exist. They're not telling you that it's a phantom. It's a fraud. It doesn't exist. But even again, look at the dense stacking of the text, the fine print. This is hard to read, and it's made deliberately hard for the eye brain to read. So each considers herself a volunteer to create a better world, and understands that she is not an employee. Well, the Sea Org, you can't even be an employee. That's irrelevant because it doesn't have any members to be employees. If we follow the logic of Miscavige's attorney, it's irrelevant to say you're not an employee because you're nothing, because the Sea Org can't have members. Okay, so therefore, however, they continue the fraud. Sea Org members are not entitled to receive secular benefits such as a minimum wage or overtime compensation. They're also not entitled to receive pensions for their old age. So these contracts really take away quite a bit. And here's another thing. Okay, I acknowledge that this declaration binds me to follow the ecclesiastical, moral, and ethical policies, rules, and norms and practices of Scientology religious philosophy as a member of a religious order. Okay, stop right there. You're giving your consent to bind yourself to a non-existent entity. That's impossible. If the Sea Org does not exist, then you can't bind yourself to obey something that's non-existent. See, again, I think that's a legal attack point. And this is why I'm showing you the contracts, how they want you to think you're belonging to something, but you actually belong to nothing. And there's a sleight of hand where they're inducing you, they're creating a perception of a Sea Org when that doesn't actually exist. Therefore, the government would have a right, or you would have a right, I think, in civil court. Again, I'm speaking as a non-lawyer, non-expert, which I'd like to get an expert on, and I'm talking to one, and I don't think this particular lawyer wants to come on and get involved. He is an expert. I would like him to get involved, but if you'd like to come on the show as an expert, it'd certainly be some great publicity for your practice. You'd get something out of coming out of here and talking about it. But not all lawyers are up to doing it. So I want to show this other thing. This is disgusting. So after Scientology lies to Sea Org members, takes them behind the First Amendment where the government can't interfere with the horrendous abuse they suffer, especially the children, the young teenagers. And if you resign from the Sea Org, this is a Hubbard policy, any person resigning from Sea Org is not to be employed in any Scientology org ever, as they are out ethics cases and PCs. He puts DBs, which means degraded beings. So if you resign from the Sea Org, you're regarded as a degraded being. And back in the day, he wrote that Bill and Helene Simmons, Smokey Angel, Terry Dickinson are an example. This is the second time Simmons has quit an org. Also, Sherry Witterson lists such personnel as resign, not to be employed. Now, he puts a note down below, 10 October 67, Sea Org personnel were permitted to resign for a few days to clear the air. The only reemployment they can have is a full contract at the Sea Org if they insist on reapplying. So when you leave the Sea Org, you're a degraded being, and you're not supposed to ever go back to the org where you were. Like if you're in Dallas, they'll tell you to leave Dallas. You're not allowed to move out. You got to move out of town if you want to stay in Scientology and you're in a lower condition. So for people who are not from America, this country was established based upon freedom of religion. You had the right to practice your religion. And that's because for 1700 years, from the establishment of Christianity forward, there was a lot of bloodshed and slaughter where religions ran the states, ran Europe, ran the Western world, Western civilization. The Catholic Church ruled it with an iron fist, and the Catholic Church was more powerful than the government, and kings had to bow to the Catholic Church. And people didn't like that, and that led to the Reformation, which probably killed 8 to 11 million people in the wars between the Catholics and the Protestants, which was a genocide. And John Calvin's Geneva, if you Google that, he was a Protestant who was a complete tyrant. I mean, he handed out death sentences. And you saw the cages in the 3 cages in Munster, which are just horrendous. I can't figure out, and I want to go back and share this, why anyone would still I don't know why, but this is just a freak thing. This cathedral in Munster in Germany, it keeps these cages out where the bodies of the 3 involved in the Munster Rebellion, they let their corpses sit in there and rot. And this is the kind of sickness of religion, I think, that human beings actually were mutilated and their corpses were put in there until they decayed and the birds of the air could feed on them. That's horrendous. That is really horrendous to see the cages of Munster. I think it's a disgrace. It is a disgrace. And the fact that if you look at the pictures, they've replaced them and they're still bracing in there. And that's just something else. I mean, that's just bizarre. So, so that's part of, that's just part of how it is. Does it make sense to secular people? No. Does it make sense to religious people? Yes. So there's a paradigmatic difference. If you're a religious person in America, you want religion to have power. You want the right to believe and practice as you want. You want your child to be raised in a Christian school, a Jewish school, an Islamic school. You want them to be indoctrinated to hate that which your religion hates. So if you're raising them in a Christian school, you want them to hate satanic schools. That means Jehovah's Witnesses, Muslims, especially Islam. You want them to see Islam as being demonic. If they're Islamic children, you want them to see Christians as being evil. So that's the paradigmatic part of the war in America. And as part of that, if you're trying to get money to finance your Islamic school, if you want the government to give you the money you would otherwise, because you're taking your child out of public school or your children out of public school, then you're going to try to support the religion of others. So that's part of the dense tangle of religion in America. Coming from other countries where that doesn't exist, you wouldn't understand it, maybe especially Western Europe. But coming from heavily Catholic countries, Mexico and Central America, Italy, you might understand it really well. It might make sense to you that religion should have power over the state. So that's sort of what goes on. And it bothered me when I saw the freeloader debt. So this is CRG resignations. Now, one thing I want to show you, if you want to do if you're a lawyer, or if you're, out there on one of the live streamers on SPTV, or even not SPTV, this book is called HCO Division, and it's the green volumes. Let me get it over. So it's called Organization Executive Course, HCO Division 1. This is the book you want to get a copy on, that has all the horrendous shit from Scientology that Hubbard wrote about why CRG members should be punished, brutalized. This has, in the stuff that's, this book is evidence. I mean, this is a volume, HCO Division 1, the OEC organization. This is the one, if you want to really get some dirt on Scientology and how filthy it is, responsibility, control, and danger conditions. It has just horrendous stuff in it. It talks about criminals, danger conditions. This is all about indoctrination and control, security of data. This is almost like one of the best books to get if you really want to see what Scientology is like on the inside. If you're a journalist or a researcher, a scholar who wants to understand it, it talks about psychosis. It attacks German psychiatry. But if you want a one single volume that has the most incriminating stuff on Scientology and what it really is, again, it's called Organization Executive Course, HCO Division, and you want to get volume 1. You can't really see it, volume 1. So the contracts, when you go down from the big picture that religion has absolute protections in America, virtually absolute, except for, obviously sex crimes, financial crimes, because you see pastors arrested every day, religious people arrested every day for sex crimes and financial crimes. But if you want to go from the big picture down to the actual contracts where the rubber meets the road in Scientology, then you have to understand the broader context in which Scientology exists. And that's all I'm saying. And I see a lack of that on SPTV, a lack of the broader understanding of the context of what it would take to revoke Scientology's tax exemption. Thank you for all these references. Well, you're welcome. And knowledge is power. But that's what I'm saying is it's like have to up the game. If you really want this to happen, I said I would like to have a foundation with at least $1 million to go sue the IRS and have some committed lawyers and people who like American atheists. They're so effective. They are so effective in serving as a counterbalance. But because I think that Scientology's tax exemption can be reopened if there's malfeasance or fraud, other causes, I think that's something worth exploring as a lawsuit. So reach out to me if you're interested. The money could be there, it could be raised. But if you think that the IRS is just going to say, okay, we'll revoke it, it's not going to happen, and you can be as outraged as you want. And I understand the outrage completely and the anger. But the way the law works in America, you have to do something about it. You have to initiate legal action. It's good to have public pressure and huge amounts of public pressure because Scientology is horrific. It doesn't deserve its tax exemption. It doesn't deserve its religious status. In fact, this book I showed you, it talks about selling, helping LRH sell. Yeah, if there's any documentation on the secret meetings and LDS, and so I'd like to see anything to show my dad. No, I don't have documentation. I have information and sources, and I know what goes on. I have people I talk to. But if there were any documentation, couldn't help your dad. What I might do on a show is I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you some similarities from the two websites. How about if I do that? I'll show you why. I'll show you from the LDS website and from Scientology's. Maybe I'll do that in a show this next upcoming week. I'll show you because you can do this as this is an inferential investigation. It was easy to see how RTC and the Mormon Intellectual Trust are carbon copies. And there's some names, some law firms that talk. And I have people who talk to me informally. I'm talking to one of them right now. One of them was a high-ranking member who got kicked out. Can you do a video on the ties between LDS and Scientology? Yeah, I'll do one. I'll do one. And that's all I will say. A historian named Toynbee had a theory of life cycles of civilizations, a process that's broken down. But a new church would be born whenever the old civilization died, which just stopped happening. I don't know. I mean, new churches start all the time, but that's a bigger question outside of what I'm discussing. I'm not quite sure I'm understanding if you could clarify that. Scientology has taken downtown Clearwater. Yeah, owns City Hall. Scientology's corruption abuse is tantamount compared to Cali. Yeah, shy funerals in Tibet is a cultural thing. Yeah. Well, you know what? If you don't stop Scientology, I mean, they can buy all the property they want in downtown Clearwater because that's not illegal to go buy up the whole town. They can buy the whole damn town. And that's not going to, the fact that they have the money. Look, here's part of the problem. We're in a capitalist society. Things are for sale. If I pay your price or pay over market and I buy it, it's legal. So, well, Scientology's takeover of Clearwater certainly is immoral and damaging to the town. In a capitalist society, I could go, if I had more money than Scientology, I would have bought downtown Clearwater because I could, if I were wealthy, if I wanted to. You know, Bill Gates owns a huge amount of farmland. The LDS Church owns 2% of Florida, 2% of the real estate in Florida, 2% of Florida. That's how much land the Latter-day Saints own in Florida. They own a lot more then Scientology owns a little time. Scientology owns, a lot of downtown Clearwater. Well, the LDS owns 2% of the entire goddamn state. 2% of the entire goddamn state of Florida is owned by the Mormons. That's a drop in the bucket compared to what Scientology owns. And you want to know what else? That's something I'll talk about later. Sacred images of torture devices are endemic to Christianity. That's true. When you look at the pictures of the torture devices used to punish heretics, it's religion has caused more death and human suffering than any war we've witnessed. Yeah. Then that's why I looked up and showed you that just that 30 years war, between 8 and 11 million people killed in a war between the Catholics and the Protestants. Some in the Reformation, like I said, it's between a quarter and half the population of Germany was killed during that time. So we're talking about bloodshed and slaughter, and that's why, as a counteraction to that, the founding fathers of America said you have to have freedom of religion to prevent this kind of slaughter. But now it's swung hard to the other side, where now there's religious extremists wanting to outlaw everything. And Roe v. Wade is viewed by secularists as a domino that could topple the Johnson Amendment and a lot of other protections and then enforce religion upon us. Already there's fights at local school boards about what books should be banned. School boards that are controlled by Christians want to ban a lot of books. So it is dangerous. Religious tyranny is very dangerous. And Scientology tyranny is particularly dangerous and destructive. They're the worst of the worst. But when you start wanting to control what books can be in school libraries, what book your children can read, or thank you for exposing this BS, Jeff. Here are the exact simple words of the First Amendment. Yeah, Carl, they are. The government can't make any laws respecting the establishment of religion. There can be no state religion. And blowback from the Texas CPS FLDS raids probably made a lot of people hesitant. It did. Form 13909. The images of the children being taken from the FLDS were something, but so Waco was horrific. Waco was horrific. The government setting fire and killing people like that was a slaughter. So it's not like it's just all one-sided. Ruby Ridge was inexcusable in my view. So, and I'm going to show when I do I'm preparing my thing on tax exemption. I'm going to show what the government really wanted from Scientology. And like I said, the government didn't kowtow to Scientology. They could give a fuck about Scientology. I keep repeating the point that the U.S. government, the FBI, the IRS, they took down the 5 mafia families. So Scientology was nothing compared to the 5 Cosa Nostra families in America that the feds took down with RICO. So Scientology, they weren't afraid of. Anyone who says that, I don't agree with. But I do know what the government wanted. I have it in writing, and I'm going to show it to you what the government really wanted Scientology to stop doing. Because the government had the rights after Hernandez versus Commissioner not give them anything, but they wanted something. Scientology had an attack point that wasn't fair game at all. It was just something the government didn't like. And David Miscavige capitulated because it was smart. So I'm going to show you this. At least the Jehovah's Witnesses have proved they are willing to do rather than let a secular state tell them how to live. What is it? Have proved they are willing to do rather than let a secular state tell them how to live. I'm not sure I understand that. Are you talking about Jehovah's Witnesses in the U.S. or overseas? I'm not sure. I understand that question. That's why Clearwater, Florida, and the rest of the country are going back to the Dark Ages. Well, a lot of people worry about that. with the rise of religion. But see, this is, for people who are secular, religion is a threat, and to people who are religion, secularism is a threat that must be destroyed. So in the Federalist Papers, James Madison wrote that there must be a multiplicity of interests to offset each other. So these are the larger constitutional issues. The macro issue, the big issue of religion in America and constitutional protections, and the Restoration of Religious Freedom Act signed under the Clinton administration, the Hobby Lobby case. So there is a larger context, and that's all I want to emphasize. So the CR contracts are very particular. They go to a particular group called the Church of Scientology, and their intent is to enslave people and to use an unholy fusion of First Amendment religious protections, that is, the government can't interfere, but also secular business law saying binding arbitration. And really, if you look at the sum of all Scientology contracts, it's information control. They don't want anyone to know how they do business. So that's when you go and you agree to not disclose any secrets of what Scientology does. And on your way out, you sign a non-disclosure agreement, agreeing not to disclose. The bottom line for Scientology, it doesn't want anyone to know how it operates, because how it operates, and I can prove this from documents, is illegal, criminal, and it acts with malice, actual malicious intent to deceive, defraud, and lie. And that's why Scientology from 1954, when Hubbard established fair game, his whole intent was to control messaging about Scientology and not let anyone know how scummy and criminal it is inside the Church of Scientology. And that's why the CR contracts, and Leah Remini, I'm so glad she's suing the church and for slander and libel. I'm glad Leah is standing up and suing them. Likewise with Valeska. And suing the church, these lawsuits are important. Likewise, the conviction of Danny Masterson, it exposed the Church of Scientology. So public pressure, if we don't put together a foundation that spends $1 million to sue, keep up the intense public pressure, keep up the leaks, keep up the exposés, because it's a combination of factors. And as the church continues to shrink, and we begin to learn more, and we have more leakers out and continual pressure on the church, something's going to give. And it's not us. It's not society. It'll be the church that'll give. But I'll tell you, there's more of us than them. And starting in the 1970s, Mafia sent their kids to Yale instead of jail. So we got Giuliani, son of a Mafia leg breaker, running for POTUS. Rudy Giuliani never ran for president that I know of. Many others in that line took over corporate America. Well, a lot of mobsters didn't want their kids to be in the life. If you listen to Michael Francisi, they didn't want their kids to be in the life. And just because your father was a mobster doesn't mean you're going to be a mobster, or that you'll go on to be a corrupt person like your father. So I'm not sure I agree with that. Giuliani's father, I didn't know he was a mobster. I would look into that. I'm sorry. Corduroy caused all of this. Yeah, going back to Corduroy being the ultimate BT magnet. I have a shoot, but it's not appropriate to show. I'll show it on the next one. How is a billion-year contract even enforceable? Well, that's a misapprehension. The CORG contract is not a contract. That's a misnomer. The CORG contract is actually a pledge. It's just a pledge. That's all it is. And I'll show it to you. Let me show you that. Let me show you that. Let's correct this misapprehension right here. The CORG contract, which I happen to have a copy handy, it's not a contract. It's a pledge. And I have it right here. We'll scroll down here. Okay, here's the CORG. It's called a religious commitment. And it's fine print. It just says, I do hereby agree to a religious commitment. And technically, it's a pledge. It just says, therefore, at the bottom in the big sentence. Let me get it up a little bit larger. It's a little bit blurry. Oh, I got to get it back. Anyway, the CR is not a contract. It's called colloquially we call it a contract. But here it says on the bottom line, therefore, I commit myself. Yeah, you should be committed if you sign this thing. Therefore, I commit myself to the Sea Organization for the next billion years, as per Flag Order 232. So we see from David Miscavige's lawyer that the Sea Org has no form of existence. It does not exist in any meaning. It doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist. So, but it's an idea. It's just an idea or a concept that has no reality to it whatsoever. It doesn't have members, as we saw Mr. Miscavige's attorney say. So all you're doing is you're committing yourself to the CIRG, but what you're wanting to do is putting Scientology's ethics on this planet and the universe. So it's a pledge to commit yourself. So when you make a commitment for a billion years, it has no legal. So in that sense, it's not enforceable, but it's not a contract. And you can't contract with something that doesn't exist. It would be like signing a contract with, it would be like signing a contract with a unicorn, something non-existent. It would have no meaning. And that's why the more people that realize that the Sea Org doesn't actually exist, and you break it down, and that's what I've been trying to do all along, is deconstruct the church for the benefit of the public so that they know what it is. And it's been personally interesting for me to see, to like deconstruct the Church of Scientology, lay out the research on my blog for people to use. They use the arbitration clause to keep it out of court. True, that's what they do because they're evil. And they don't want to go to court, and they don't want their dirty deeds exposed, so they'll drive you into arbitration. There's other contracts they have you sign. Yeah, there's 5 of them or 4 of them specifically. Yeah, the arbitration contract will keep it out of court. I'm in the dark ages living in Clearwater. Clearwater has declined as Scientology's banana republic. Well, you can always move. No one's, if Clearwater becomes that bad, I understand it's just downtown. I from my understanding is that it's downtown Clearwater that's the Scientology ghost town, and the rest of Clearwater is a pretty doggone good place to live. I know people in Clearwater, they like the quality of life, but downtown, it's a ghost town. It's a Scientology morgue. And I remember, possibly Trouble says, getting in trouble in school because I said that evolution and religion are theories, not fact. You'd have thought I'd set off a bomba. Yeah, well, it depends when, that, I guess, yeah, the wrong teacher would take that the wrong way. When I went to high school, I could see a lot of my teachers would have gone nuclear had I said that evolution and religion are theories. They would have either went, at my school, they would have said religion, like Mr. Sanders, he would have said religion is BS, but evolution is true. And then there were other teachers that would have said, no, monkeyism, the idea of Darwin and evolution. Didn't Julie B asked, didn't LRH say to give people their money back if they didn't like it? Yes. If so, they owe many more people their freeloader money. Well, that's 2 different things. Scientology told the IRS in its 1023 application that it was easy to get refunds because if you weren't happy with Scientology, they didn't want you there. They only wanted happy people. So they lied to the IRS. They out and outright lied to the IRS, and I can show that. Freeloader debt's different. Hubbard in this volume I showed you, that freeloaders are people, the original definition differed from the more modern one. In its original version, Julie, Hubbard said that people who signed, a lot of people who couldn't afford auditing, they would sign a staff contract and go on staff and work, and they would get free auditing. And then once they got their free auditing, they would quit and they wouldn't pay for that auditing. So Hubbard called them criminals and said that they have a freeloader debt because they signed promising to serve 2.5 or 5 years, or and they got their free auditing, because staff used to get a lot more free auditing than they do now. That was your exchange. You worked on staff and you got free auditing. So if you ran up $10,000 in auditing and you were only earning $1,000 a year, and you left after you got all your free auditing, then that's technically freeloading. But Hubbard changed that to where all the training you ever got, he kept a running tally. And so, for example, my lovely wife, Karen, class 12K supervisor, she served for 20 years, routed out in 1990. So she put in 20 full years of exchange, and she was doing the L's. And I got to tell you, Karen is quite impressive. She delivered the L's in French and English at Flag. She was a bilingual auditor making $1,000 an hour in the 1980s for the church. She was a money maker. She made them a fuckload of money. So she more than paid for the courses and the training. But when she left in 1990, they hit her with a $90,000 freeloader debt. And she was a single mom and she had to pay it or she would have been disconnected. And Heber never paid child support, and she wasn't going to make him because he was making $50 a week or less, and she wasn't going to embarrass Heber at all. And she didn't ask Heber to, and Heber didn't have the money. So, but they hit Karen with a $90,000 freeloader debt. So to me, that's criminal. Now, Shelley Miscavige told Claire Headley that, and I have Claire in an interview several years ago, and I really like Claire and what she's done. Shelley Miscavige told Claire Headley, when Claire was high-ranking RTC official, that the freeloader debt was unenforceable, but they used it as a control factor. Scientology used it as a control factor. They hung it over your head because people who left CR believed it was enforceable. They believed it. Now, also opportunistically, if Scientology could get you to repay your freeloader debt, why, of course, they would take the money. And they wouldn't let you back on course and do a lot of things if you didn't pay it. So it's kind of a ripoff. Hubbard got plenty of exchange from Karen and so many other CIRG members. Even after he died, Miscavige has gotten plenty of exchange, and they hit them with a freeloader. That is something the IRS could look at, because that has to do with compensation. If your compensation is auditing and training, which you use on the job, that's something that's worth exploring. Oh, excuse me. I think it's RTC calling me. I thought I had my phone turned off. It was it was the FBI calling. It was the FBI calling, and they wanted to know if I would turn this over, my files. I told them no, they're not getting it. No, not really. This is the Miscavige file. No, actually, that would be funny if I had something the FBI wanted, and it concerned a certain David Miscavige in his anyway. Let's hope Leah can finally pierce the pledge or contract and litigate this. Well, she's actually suing for slander and libel and some other causes of action, and I think she's got a terrific case. I really admire Leah. She's one of my heroes for doing what she's doing, and all beliefs our theories of mind. We all have the right to choose. Well, yes, but we don't have the right to act. Like I can't, when you begin to destroy other people, that's when the government has a right, to get involved. So anyway, that's sort of like the big picture. If you want, you can't, unless you understand how the United States was founded to give religious freedom primacy and how religions have exploited that and become more powerful and tyrannical. It's almost like the founding principles of America. Religious freedom is means you have the freedom to join a religion or not join a religion. That was the original concept of the founding fathers, but religions become this, in my opinion, this tyrannical force in American life. Often, not all the time, but often, and it's become identified. I invented a word in one of from called Goppianity, and it's just the GOP, the Republican Party, with Christianity. I coined a word called Goppianity, which was the fusion of evangelical Christianity and Republican politics. And that's one reason I left the church as a young man is after the Jesus People movement cooled off, we were all expected to get haircuts, go to work, and become good Republicans. And I didn't like this radical agenda to we were expected to hate gay people, hate abortion, hate so much, and I couldn't be part of that. I didn't want to be part of it. So anyway, that's some things we've gone through. So you go from the macro down to the level of Scientology contracts. It's all part of a larger picture of religion in America. And again, like I said, it came out of 1,700 years of religious bloodshed. It was an attempt and an American experiment to attempt to give you freedom from religion or freedom to practice your religion, and the state not interfering in your choice. And now it's become something else to where Scientology can force you into binding arbitration. I don't think that's the intent of the founding fathers, that religion should have the freedom to force you into binding arbitration or unconscionable contracts or actual malicious contracts or human trafficking of children. So I don't think that was the intent of the founding fathers. So these things you either get through by having whistleblowers who can expose the dirt, or we start a foundation, we meaning people who are interested, fund it with $1 million, whatever it takes to go to court and sue. And that's the reality of it. It's not easier than it. I wish it were easier, but it's not. And we'll leave it at that. So thank you for watching. This has been, like I said, this hasn't been about celebrities. It's not anything entertaining, but it's kind of a factual, structural look at the larger problem. And so if the video doesn't get a lot of views, I understand it. But for the people who really care, reach out. Maybe you can make a difference. And this is one reason why Leah Remini suing the church, that can make a difference. Danny Masterson being convicted of SA and the church being exposed for their role in it, that made a difference. So there's things that make a difference, versus simply wondering why things don't get done. Well, that's why you actually have to make things happen. That's the answer. You have to make things happen. You have to file lawsuits or get whistleblowers or collect evidence or do something. You actually have to make things happen. And, I'll leave it at that. And it's been great to hang around with you. Enjoyed your comments. And please, leave comments. I'm going to post some of the things I showed you so you can understand, especially the Freedom Restoration Act, the Clinton era law, then has caused so many problems in America. So I'm going to end now, and I don't have this one up, but I am getting closer and closer to getting my getting my tax exemption show going. So Scientology, we're watching it collapse and implode. And on the way down, we'll have a good time narrating it and wish you all the best. So that's Scientology. Their stat crash, they're going down. And I'll see you next time. Thank you.